let's talk about the secret to resumes. So hopefully you guys have all got a resume by now. And some of the things that people will tell you to put on your resume includes an objective statement. What's an objective statement?
What are your goals?
Yeah, it's what you want to do, your goals. And what I would tell you is never put an objective statement on your resume. And here's why. You don't know what all the opportunities are out there. You have no idea. And so if you say, I want a high-performance sales job with a top company, I'm going to look at our company and say, whoop, he's too good for us, right? Chuck you in the trash. By the way, let me tell you the secret about resume sorting. I used to get all sorts of resumes when I was in industry for the management training program. And we had to chuck out probably 80 to 90% of those. So what do? Well, the first thing you do is go through and look for people with spelling errors and crap like that, because you know they're not detail attention oriented. So you chuck those. And then back then it was if you had a dot matrix printer and you had printed out your stuff on dot matrix instead of a laser jet. You guys probably don't even know what dot matrix is. It makes a noise bzz, 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 as it prints. It's like 1980s. Okay, so we throw those out. Anything in crayon, poof, immediately gone, right? So you're looking for reasons to chuck people, and the objective statement can be a good reason to chuck people. The other thing that I don't like about objective statements is that it's all about what I want as a job seeker. And remember, the goal of financial management is to maximize shareholder wealth. And so the people who are looking at your resume, that's what they're trying to figure out. Is that what you're going to do for them? And when you're like me in my objective statement, then that kind of turns people off and you get chucked. So the best way not to get chucked is to not put anything on there at all. So we don't put an objective statement on there. By the way, my objective statement, if I had to have one, would be, I want a job, right? And so when people are like, so what drew you to us? Like, well, I needed a job and you've got a job opening, so there we go. Okay, now personal traits. Have you ever seen these? Top performer, team-oriented, self-starter. Do you know what I think when I read that sort of stuff? Horse shit. Can you credibly certify any of those things? No. And in fact, the kind of people who actually have those traits will probably feel embarrassed putting it on their resume. So don't put personal traits. How are we going to figure out your personal traits? Well, we're going to sit across from the table from you, and we're going to think back over the last 500 people we've interviewed, and what were the qualities of the people that worked out, and what were the qualities of the ones that we had to flush. And that's going to help me figure out your personal traits. I'm going to ask you some questions about your previous behavior. Tell me about a time when you had a difficulty with a supervisor and how you worked through that. Tell me about a time that a subordinate was disrespectful to you in front of your other subordinates, and how did you handle that? That's what I'm going to do to figure out what your personal traits are. I'm not going to believe anything you write on your resume, so don't waste the space. What should you have? Well, you should only have action verbs. Implemented inventory system that reduced, and this is a concrete accomplishment, reduced inventory by $12 million. Created new turnaround program, saving company $47 million. These sorts of things. Don't ever use passive voice. A program was implemented. No. This is all about you. So these need to be action verbs. They need to be concrete things that you've done. And then finally, let's ask this question. Should you ever include a picture with your resume? I'm surprised to hear an American say yes. Typically in the US, we don't include pictures with resumes because we are concerned with people accusing us of discriminating based on someone's group category, whatever it is. And so we typically don't do that. Now, what about Vietnam? Mr. Huang.
I think some people do put pictures.
Yeah. So in Asia, you'll see a lot of people putting pictures. Now, I don't know, how is it in India?
Not really.
Okay, so not if you're applying to India, if you're applying to Vietnam, Singapore, China, I don't know about Korea and Japan, but I do know that Singapore, China, Vietnam, you want to put a picture in, especially if you're good looking. So I have a friend from Hong Kong, and she knows she is not attractive. And it doesn't hurt her to know that. I mean, she's okay. So I asked her one time, I said, why did you choose to work for the Hong Kong government? And she said they were the only people who didn't request a photograph with the resume. As a result, what do you think the government employees look like in Hong Kong? They're all very homely, right? Faces only mothers could love. Okay, so these are the things to think about. If you're actually, and some of you may decide you want to go try to work in Asia, you may need to put a picture in there. Something else that's interesting when applying to jobs in Asia, they'll ask you, what does your mother do? What does your father do? And especially if you're going to the People's Republic of China, they'll ask you if you've ever served in the military, because they're concerned that you're a spy. Questions? Okay, well, let's get back to our investment decision criteria. And we've been talking about IRR. Can anybody tell me what is the definition of IRR?
The discount rate that makes your NPV 0.
Very good. It's a discount rate that makes NPV equal to 0. So here we have an IRR example. And I want you to get your calculator out. And we are going to use the CF keys. Now, the first thing I'm going to tell you to do is you hit CF second, and then go down and hit the clear button. And the reason why is the calculator is like a wife. It never forgets. You have to do this clearing out to get out the old cash flows. If only wives had a similar button where I could. Now, by the way, the stuff that she remembers, it's stupid stuff that I did, right? So it's my fault. But it would still be nice to have the ability to clear that out. Okay, so we've got rid of that. And now we are going to start putting in some cash flows. An investment of $200 today gets you $100 per year for the next 3 years. What is the IRR? First of all, what are our cash outflows here? You need to think in terms of inflows and outflows. What are the outflows?
200.
Yeah, just that initial 200. And what kind of sign should we put on a cash outflow?
Negative.
Yeah, negative. So here we are going to go 200, negative, enter. You got to hit enter or it's like it never even happened. Then we're going to arrow down. C01. What should I put for C01? 100. And what sign should it have on it?
Positive.
Positive. Very good. So 100, enter. Arrow down. What does F01 mean?
It's the number of periods that cash flow occurs.
Yes, a number of times in a row that identical cash flow happens. What should we put in for F01? 3. Let's see. I don't know why it changes size when I go from one side to the other. Oh, for shame, he's a little late. There we go. Sorry, I didn't realize you guys couldn't see that. Okay, so now we have F01 is equal to 3. Anything else we should do with our cash flows at this point? I think we're good to go. Now, here's the most difficult question of today. What button should I hit next to calculate IRR? IRR. Do you see the button that says IRR? Now it says IRR is equal to 0. Does that mean the IRR is equal to 0? No. What do we have to do?
Compute.
Yeah, we got to compute. What button do we hit?
CPT.
CPT, upper left-hand corner. I'm getting 23.375%. So the answer that it returns to you is in percent, so keep that in mind. Now, we said earlier that the IRR is the discount rate that makes NPV equal to 0. So here's an experiment. I'm going to say store 1, and then I'm going to hit the NPV button. And right here where it says I'm going to say recall 1, and I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to arrow down, and I'm going to go ahead and compute my NPV. It says 1.28 times, and it means times 10 to the negative 11th. This is scientific notation. You guys may have never seen this before, but here's how it works. That 10 to the negative 11th, we're talking about how many decimals do we move over. So we're talking about this being 0.0000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000 1. Can we agree that that is basically 0? Yeah. Okay, so it's passed the stint test. This is a way you can check your work. You throw your IRR back into your NPV and see if you get 0. By the way, the NPV works off the same CF cash flows that the IRR is. And we're going to see that anytime we calculate one of them, basically we go ahead and calculate the other one. Why? Because if we've got the numbers, we might as well, right? It's easy. So, does IRR account for the time value of money? Yes, how?
Has the discount rate?
Yeah, it's got the discount rate, and we're using it to calculate basically the present value of those future cash flows. The only thing is that we don't have the R, but it's still discounting those future cash flows. Does it account for the riskiness of the cash flows? Yes, he says again. Why?
It shows the minimum return needed to.
Okay, you're getting, let me ask you this. What is the rule for accepting a project IRR? No.
Wrong.
That was MPV. Swing and a miss. What's the, Mr. Rollins?
Does it just have to be above like a certain threshold that you set?
It does, but it's not a threshold that you just arbitrarily set. Mr. Bardwash. Yeah, as long as it's greater than the discount rate, then most of the time that means the NPV is greater than 0, and therefore we accept the project. And so, how are we accounting for the riskiness of the cash flows here? The riskiness of the cash flows helped us to determine that discount rate, and we are comparing the IRR versus that discount rate, and so that's how we account for the riskiness of the cash flows. And then finally, does it provide information regarding the wealth created by the project? Raise your hand if you think yes. I like your response. He's undecided, so I would accept both yes and no here, and here's what I mean. Does it provide information about the wealth created? Well, we know whether or not we're creating wealth. Because, and I have to say again, in most situations, if the IRR is greater than the discount rate, then we know we are creating wealth. But do we know how much? No. Remember, NPV gives us dollars and cents, exactly how much wealth we estimate we are creating. IRR does not do that. And so IRR is not as good a measure as NPV. We're going to give it 2.5 stars. It's not quite 3 stars, it's just 2.5 stars. And sadly, we are not through talking about IRR's problems yet, because IRR has some special problems of its own. First of all, Independent versus mutually exclusive projects. What does mutually exclusive mean?
You can do one project, but it prevents you from doing the other.
Yeah, if I've got, no matter how many projects I've got here, if they're mutually exclusive, I can only choose to do one. But if they're independent, then I can do them all if I would so choose. So, for example, if we have two projects, both of which have a positive NPV, and they are independent projects, what would we do? Yeah, we go ahead and do both of them. But if they're mutually exclusive, meaning I could only do one, which one would I choose?
The one with the highest NPV.
Yeah, the one with the highest NPV. I think you've earned a challenge coin today. All right. Okay, so we're going to take the one with the highest NPV. Why? Because the goal of financial management is to maximize shareholder wealth. If I've got one project that's going to add $1 million to shareholder wealth and another project that's going to add $100,000 to shareholder wealth, you know which one I'm going to take. I'm going to take the big one. Okay. Now, we have a street corner in Los Angeles, and we have narrowed it down to two projects that we could do on that street corner. One is a snow cone stand. Do you guys know what snow cones are? Mr. Bardwaj, are you familiar with snow cones? That's fascinating. Most Americans, if they're from outside of this part of the country, they'll call it shave ice. So apparently, have you encountered it here? Yeah, pretty nasty, huh? Oh, wow, back home too. Okay. Okay, so snow cone stand, and it makes sense. LA is hot and dry. Snow cones probably sell like hotcakes, but they're not hot, of course. So the other is a swanky nightclub. What does the word swanky mean? Nobody knows swanky? It's fancy. A swanky nightclub. It's a fancy nightclub. A place where Paris Hilton might be pleased to embarrass herself getting out of a limo. That kind of a place. You guys don't even know who Paris Hilton is. I've got to update my cultural references. Okay, I asked this question in Mississippi about what does swanky mean. And I had a young lady raise her hand and she said, slutty? And I said, no, that's skanky, but thanks for trying. Okay. That story never gets old, at least to me. That was 19 years ago, by the way. Okay, so here we have these two projects. Now, I want you to notice that the snow cone stand costs a whole lot less to get started. Does that make sense? Yeah. And what makes these mutually exclusive? We've got just one piece of real estate. We can do one or the other. We cannot do both. Lots of times students are like, oh, hey, couldn't we just serve snow cones in the day and have a nightclub at night? Hey, you know, we'll just say that that's not possible due to liquor laws or some stuff. So these are mutually exclusive. Let's go ahead and we will figure out what is the IRR of the snow cone stand. And we will also, while we have the cash flows in our calculator, we'll go ahead and figure out the NPV. Now there's a piece of information here that I haven't given you yet that you'll need for NPV and to apply the IRR rule. And that is, nightclubs and snow cone stands are equally risky. And they both require a rate of return of 10%. So you go ahead and write that down. They both require a rate of return of 10%. So now we're going to get our calculator out, and we're going to say CF second clear work. And I'm going to put in for CF0 for the snow cone stand 100 negative. What button do I hit next?
Enter.
Enter. I'm going to arrow down, and what should I put in for C01? 50. Very good. Enter, arrow down. What should I put for F01? 3, because that cash flow happens 3 times in a row, and then I hit enter. That is all the cash flows. Those are all the cash flows for the snow cone stand. What button do I hit next to calculate the IRR? IRR. So I'm just going to hit that button, and then I'm going to hit compute. I'm getting 23.375%, and I want you to write that number down in the IRR box. Does that number look familiar? Yeah, it's what we just had, right? And it's not by accident. And here's why. IRR only considers the relative size of the cash flows. So any set of cash flows where the time zero cash flow is twice as much and negative of the time one cash flow, and that time one cash flow happens 3 times in a row, and that's all we've got. Anytime you have that set up, you're going to have an IRR of 23.375%. So I could put in here minus 4 million, 2 million, 2 million, 2 million. I can guarantee you that IRR of that is going to be 23.375%. Now remember that we said that the discount rate here was 10%. Just looking at IRR alone, for this project alone, would we accept or reject the project?
Accept.
Yeah, we would accept it because 23.375 is greater than 10. Okay, now, while we have those cash flows in our calculator, let's go ahead and hit our NPV button. What should we put in for I? 10. Enter. Arrow down. Compute. We have an NPV of $24.34. Go ahead and write that one down. $24.34. Using the NPV decision rule, would we accept or reject this project on its own merit? Yeah, we would accept it. Okay, so now let's go ahead and see if second clear work. What should I put in? We're going to look at now the nightclub. What should I put in for C of 0? Yep, negative 1,000. Enter, arrow down. What about C, 0, 1? 450. Enter, arrow down. What is that, 0, 1? 3. 3. Enter. Okay, now we're going to hit the IRR button and hit compute. And we have now 16.649%. Go ahead and write that one down, 16.649%. What was the IRR for project A? 23.375%. Which is higher, 23.375 or 16.649? Yeah, 23.375. And if you were just looking at IRR, you would choose project A. Now, let's show why that's dangerous. Let's show why that's dangerous. We're going to hit NPV. We're going to put in 10, enter, arrow down, compute. I'm getting 119.08. 119.08. Write that one down. What was the NPV of the first project, the snow cone stand? 24.34. What is greater, 119.08 or 24.34? 119. Which of these projects maximizes shareholder wealth? B. If they're mutually exclusive, we choose B. What if they're independent? Yeah, we do them both, right? Because they're both positive NPV. They both increase shareholder wealth. Now, what's leading to this problem? IRR does not take into account the scale of the initial investment. Remember, I told you that it's only the relative size of these cash flows, the investment versus the later cash flows, that matters for IRR. And so it could have been we invested $2 and got $1, $1, $1, or we invested $2 trillion and got $1 trillion, $1 trillion, $1 trillion. It doesn't take the scale into account. What we're saying here is we would rather, it makes us richer to make 16.65% on $1,000 than to get 24.34% on 100. Would you like to be able to invest 1,000 at 24.34%? Of course you would. But the project that's not the scale of the project. And so that is the problem with mutually exclusive projects and IRR. What should you always use to determine between mutually exclusive projects? NPV. Always use NPV. Now, the next problem that we identify with IRR is the problem of multiple IRRs. We have what are called conventional cash flows, where there's only one sign change. Usually, in the example problems that you'll see, you've got one negative cash flow at time 0, and then they turn positive. Do you think that's what it looks like in the real world? No, because usually let's talk about building a factory. Do you think you can snap your fingers and make a factory pop into existence? No. So usually we're going to have probably time 0, 1, and 2 being negative, maybe all the way out to time 3 being negative before we start to see positive cash flow out of that investment. But it's still a conventional set of cash flows as long as there's only one sign change. But if this thing starts out negative and then it goes positive and then somewhere along the way it turns back negative, then we have more than one sign change. And every time we have a sign change, we are going to get another IRR. So we have one IRR for every sign change. If I have one sign change, conventional, I only have one IRR, no problem. If I have two sign changes, now I have two IRRs and things get a little hairy. If I have 3 sign changes, guess how many IRRs I'm going to have? 3, right? That's the way it works. Okay, so let's talk about what these projects look like. And there are actually projects in the real world that work like this. Let's take the first example as the coal mine. And I have to be specific here. It's an American coal mine because United States law says when you get done, you have to put everything back the way you found it, coal mining company. And so we have the big initial cash flow. By the way, the way coal is mined in the United States is they go in and they knock the top off the mountain and then they scoop the coal out. So the shaft mining, like my wife's grandfather did, where they get in there and pick it out, we don't do that anymore. We just get in there and scoop that stuff straight out. It's called pit mining. Now, here's the problem. When you're pushing the mountaintop off, gravity is your friend, right? It takes that stuff, that rubble down the side of the mountain, and now you're up there scooping coal. But after you've scooped out all the coal, you've got many, many years of positive cash flows as you scoop out the coal. At the end, remember we said the United States government is going to require you to rebuild the mountain. Do you think that requires money? Oh yeah. Not only do you have to push that stuff back up the side of the mountain, you've got to apparently go down to Mexico and dig another hole to have enough dirt to fill in where the coal came out. I'm not sure exactly how that works. Long story short, though, we have negative cash flow up front, positive cash flows over the operating life, and then a negative cash flow at the end. Another example is a gas station. When you build a gas station, you go in there, and one of the first things you do is you bury the tanks. By the way, there are tanks underground at the gas station. I actually worked with a woman that was so dumb, she thought that each gas station was located over an oil well. And that they were, had 3 wells there, premium, regular, well, anyway. Yeah, she was not that bright. Okay, so they get these tanks. And then you build the gas station on top of that. You got your gas pumps, you got your building where you can go in and get your beer and cigarettes and your lottery tickets. And then you run that for 30 years. So you got a big negative cash flow up front as you make your investment. You got positive cash flows, hopefully, over the years as you run the convenience store. And then when you decide to shut down, the United States government makes you do something pretty weird. Any ideas what?
Tank or filling hole.
Yeah, so you've got to go in there and dig up those tanks. Why?
Eventually they just rot out and then that'll make like a little sinkhole.
Well, not only the sinkholes, we're worried about stuff draining out of the tanks, right? Because can you ever get all the gasoline out of the tank? No. Short of, like dropping a cigarette down in there, which I don't recommend. And so what they make you do is they dig those tanks out. By the way, one of the interesting things I learned in mechanical engineering school was something called sacrificial anode or cathode, I forget which one. But basically, you take a block of magnesium, which is more active than the carbon steel you're making the tank out of, and you hook it to the tank with a piece of cable. And what will happen is that piece of magnesium gets consumed first, and then once it goes away, then the tank starts to corrode. So that's why they're making you dig up the tank. Not only do you have to dig up the tank, you have to scrape all the dirt out from underneath it and send it off somewhere in Kansas to be incinerated and then brought back to burn out any kind of excess gasoline that might have leaked out of the tanks. And so at the end, you could just shut down the store and walk away and call it a zero cash flow, but the government says, wait a minute, pal, you've got to come in here and clean this site up. So you've got a negative cash flow at the end. So this is not all that unusual to see this pattern of cash flows. For this particular project, we have a negative $100 investment up front. We have 1 year of operation where we have $230 cash coming in, and then we have to spend $132 to shut the operation down in year 2. So let's go ahead and put that into our calculator and see what we get. CF, second, clear work. What should I put in for CF0? Yeah, negative 100. Enter. Arrow down. What should I put in for cash flow for time 1? 230. Enter. Arrow down. And what should I put in for F1?
1.
Yeah, just leave it as is. And C02, how much is it?
Negative 132.
Yeah, negative 132. Enter, and F02 would be 1, right? It just stays as 1. Pardon me. Now, I can hit IRR here and compute. And the calculator gives me an IRR of 10%. Now, let's check and see if that's true. I'm going to pull up my NPV here. I'm going to put in 10, enter, arrow down, compute. Now that little star there tells me this is a computed value. This time we hit 0 dead on the nose. So is an IRR of the set of cash flows 10? Yeah. Now let's show you something mind-blowing though. If I put in 20 here, arrow up. Put in 20 here, enter, arrow down, compute. I get negative 5 times 10 to the negative 13. Remember earlier when I did the dance and almost had to go out of the room? This one is 2 more decimal places over. And so we've got 12 zeros and a 5. Can we agree that that's damn near 0? Given that this is in dollars and cents. So we're talking fractions of a penny. Okay, now here's the problem. Remember I told you for every sign change we are going to have another IRR. And we can demonstrate that with this thing. It's called the NPV profile. So on the horizontal axis we have the discount rate. And on the vertical axis, we have NPV. Now, let's talk about some different discount rates. If I do my calculator, oh, by the way, I need to show you this. Do you think the calculator is going to give me that other number? Do you think if I hit IRR and compute, it gives me 10. Do you think if I hit arrow down, it's going to give me the other IRR? No, the calculator's lazy. It gets to the first IRR and it stops. And so you can't trust the calculator. You have to be on the ball. You have to know that there is more than one sign change, and therefore you have to know that there's going to be more than one IRR. Now, what is the rule for accepting projects as far as IRR goes? We accept the project when the IRR is greater than the discount rate. And so when we look at this picture right here, we see that in this zone right here, the IRR of 10 is greater than the discount rate. So the IRR rule would tell us to accept the project in that zone. But there's only one problem. What does the NPV look like in that area?
It's negative.
It's negative. And what would the NPV rule tell us to do?
Reject it.
Yeah, reject it. Now, if I have to trust the NPV rule or the IRR, which one am I going to trust? NPV is the gold standard, right? That's the one I'm always going to fall back to, because even though this situation gives us a bad answer in terms of IRR, we'll still get the correct answer with NPV. Now let's look at the next little piece between 10 and 20. The discount rate there is going to be greater than that IRR of 10% that we found. If the IRR therefore is less than the discount rate, would we accept or reject?
Reject.
Yeah, we'd reject it. But what's the NPV like there?
Awesome.
It's positive. And what would the rule tell us?
To accept.
Yeah, we're going to accept that project. And so once again, in that zone, we're going to end up with a situation where we get the wrong answer. Long story short, if you have unconventional or non-conventional cash flows, meaning more than one sign change, you can't trust IRR. I'm going to say that one more time. If you have more than one sign change, which we call unconventional or non-conventional cash flows, you cannot trust IRR. But you can trust NPV. You can trust NPV. So we have figured out it's only 2.5 stars because it doesn't tell us an amount for the amount of wealth that's being created. We know that it can give us bad answers for mutually exclusive projects, and we know that it can give us bad answers for unconventional or non-conventional cash flows, meaning more than one sign change. So you may think, well, wait a minute, this thing is a dog with fleas. It might be meatloaf because we've got the same ingredients that we need for NPV, but we're making something that's not quite as good. But there are still reasons to use IRR. First of all, who do you think is more likely to end up being the CEO of the firm? A marketing person or a finance person?
I was going to say finance, but.
Oh, it's because you're biased, right? Okay, so let me tell you some things about marketing people versus finance people. Now, this isn't necessarily true about everyone, but typically finance people like numbers and machines more than they like people. Let me tell you about the CEOs I've known. I met a guy that was the CEO of Halliburton, and I met him in 1994 while I was interviewing for the job. Didn't know who he was, but we met that one time. I ran into him like 2 years later. He remembered my name. I can't remember your name after you just told it to me, right? I'm not a people person. I'm a numbers person. I prefer numbers, robots, and dogs, right? I can always remember a dog's name. Now, let's think about marketing people. You think they're more likely to be people? Oh, yeah. You can't shut them up, right? They love to talk, and they're just really gregarious, and they'll probably remember your name, and they'll remember about your kids and all that kind of stuff. Now, who do you think is more likely to become a CEO? Someone who'd rather not spend any time with people at all, or someone who's, which one?
Marketing.
Yeah, the marketing guy. And if you don't believe me, just go out and look. Very few engineers and finance people in charge of companies versus a number of marketing and sales type folks. And it all boils down to they're good with people and we're not. Don't take that the wrong way. It's just the way we're made. Okay, back to the story. You guys have probably had Finance 380 with some marketing people. Do you think 10 years from now they'll remember diddly squat about NPV? No. But they will have a mortgage, they will have a car loan, they will have a retirement account, and all those things will have some sort of rate associated with them. Maybe their car loan is 7%, maybe their mortgage is 6%, maybe their portfolio earned 13% last year. If I have a good project, by the way, what's a good project? Positive NPV. If I have a good project, I can go up to them and say, oh yeah, this has got a NPV of $231,000, and they'll probably just look at me with glazed eyes. But if I tell them it's got an IRR of 27%, now they can compare against these other rates they know. They're like, well, hell, I only get 13% on my retirement account. I'd love to get 27%. And so you can use it to help non-finance people understand that a project is good. But you've got to be careful. If the project has a negative NPV, don't tell them about the high IRR. If the NPV for that project, or the discount rate for that project was 31%, the NPV would be negative, the IRR would still be 27%, and the marketing guy will not know the difference. And so at that point, you just have to really double down on, boss, this project is going to destroy shareholder value. We shouldn't do it. It will be bad for your image. That's how you get them. You tell them it'd be bad for their image. This will not look good on LinkedIn. Destroyed $1.3 million worth of shareholder value. Do you really want to put that out on your next LinkedIn notification? I don't think so. Okay, so that's the first reason. The second one is if the IRR is high enough, you might not even need to know the discount rate. And by the way, we discussed finding the discount rate is the hardest freaking part of doing NPV and IRR analysis. But what if I didn't have to find that discount rate? What if the IRR of replacing the company truck is 45%? Do I really need to know whether that discount rate is 7% or 11%? Is it really that risky to buy a new company truck? Have you guys seen the show Landman? Oh man, you've got to watch this. Paramount Plus. There's a lot of stuff about investment under risk, and about this. It's a company, oil company, close to the border in Texas, and their vehicles keep getting stolen, but then they show back up 2 weeks later. This is because the drug runners are stealing the trucks, using them to transport the drugs, and then they bring them back for whatever reason. In that case, I might think that I still need to figure out what my discount rate is because I've got such a high loss rate on my trucks. The other thing is the oil field stuff that you see in Landman, very realistic, very realistic. Some of the other stuff, I assume they're just throwing in drama for Hollywood's sake. Okay, any questions about either one of these reasons why people still use IRR? Okay. Now let's talk about the profitability index. Now the profitability index, the initial definition is the present value of cash flows subsequent to the initial investment divided by the initial investment. What does subsequent to mean?
After.
Yeah, after or following, right? And so and it assumes, PI assumes that all the investment is at time zero. PI assumes that all the investment is time zero. And so we're looking at the present value of all the cash flows that happen after time zero, and then we are dividing by the initial investment. Note, the initial investment in the PI formula is positive. The initial investment in the PI formula is positive. Let me say that one more time. The initial investment in the PI formula is positive. What do we usually associate with the initial investment?
Negative.
Negative. Don't do that because you will get exactly the wrong answer. Okay, now, if we take the book's definition of NPV, which is the present value of the cash flow subsequent to the initial investment, subtract the initial investment, that's the NPV, we can rearrange that algebraically and come up with that the present value of the cash flow subsequent to initial investment is just the initial investment plus the NPV. That's going to be equal to the present value of the cash flow subsequent to initial investment. You can prove it to yourself later. I can see Mr. Bardwaj is figuring it out, right? Okay, so if I take that and I distribute that initial investment, I've divided on both sides. I get initial investment over initial investment, divide by NPV over initial investment. What happens to initial investment over initial investment? Yeah, it's just 1, right? And so the formula that I want you to have on your note sheet is that PI is equal to 1 plus NPV divided by the initial investment. Now, to come up with the rule for PI, all we have to do is apply the rule for NPV. What's the rule for NPV?
Accept anything that's positive.
Yeah, except anything greater than 0, right? Anything greater than 0. If I throw anything greater than 0 into this formula for NPV, I'm going to get a number that is greater than 1. If I throw anything greater than 0 in for NPV, I'm going to get a PI greater than 1. And so the rule is we accept all projects with PI greater than 1. Questions so far? Okay, so what do we need for PI? Well, we need the initial investment amount at time 0. Remember, it's all focused at time 0. We need the future cash flows and their timing, and we need a discount rate appropriate to the risk of the cash flows. It turns out that the ingredients are exactly the same as those for NPV. After all, NPV is actually in the formula for PI, so we know we've got to have those same ingredients. Does PI account for the time value of money?
Yes.
Yes. Does it account for the riskiness of the cash flows? Yes. After all, this thing's got NPV in it, right? Does it provide information regarding the wealth created by the project?
Yes.
Yeah, kind of. We are back to where we were with IRR. If PI is greater than 1, we know we're creating wealth, but we don't know how much. So once again, this is a 2.5 star rating. And so you say, well, wait a minute, it's the same stuff as NPV. It's got only 2.5 stars. Why would we still use it? Well, it's useful during times of capital rationing. What is rationing?
Restricted capital use.
Yeah, let's not even go to the money yet. When my mom was a little kid, World War II was on. That's how old she is, and that's how old I am, right? My mom was born before World War II. When she was a little girl, there was rationing. You could only buy a certain amount of butter every week. You could only buy a certain amount of gasoline every week. You could only buy a certain number of sets of tires every year. By the way, tires didn't last as long back then, so it was more than 1 set per year. But those things were all rationed. Why were they rationed? If you've got enough for everybody to have everything, to be able to buy everything that they want, do you have to have rationing? No. And so that's what rationing was for food and supplies, things like that during the war. Capital rationing is the same idea. If I don't have enough money to fund all positive NPV projects, then I have to resort to capital rationing. Let me say that one more time. If I don't have enough money to fund all positive NPV projects, then I have to resort to capital rationing. So how do we apply this? Well, we go and we look at every single one of our projects. By the way, do I even bother with the negative NPV projects? No, not if I'm a business. Now, government, different story, but if I'm a business, I don't do that. I check those out, and then the ones that are remaining, I calculate a PI for each and every one of them. So let's do a set of projects up here. We've got projects A, B, C, and D, and we have $100 million to invest. That's all we have. The initial investment for project A is $50 million. For project B is $20 million. For project D, or C, is $40 million. And for project D is $30 million. And the profitability indices look like this: 3.2, 2.7, 1.4, 1.1. By the way, are these all good projects? Yeah, they're all positive NPV because these PIs are all greater than 1. So these are all good projects. If we had the money, what would we do? We would do them all, right? We would do all of them. But we don't have that kind of money. So here we go. By the way, these are millions. Okay. Project A. Should I accept or reject the project? Accept it. How much money do I have left? 50 million. Project B, do I accept or reject the project? Accept it. And it cost me 20 million. How much money do I have left? 30. Project C, accept or reject? Reject. Why? Yeah, we can't afford it, right? We don't have 40 million bucks. Project D, accept or reject? Accept. And how much money do we have left over? Zero. I mean, I could have put some other projects down here, but we would have stopped after project D. Now, one way I could ask about this I could give you NPVs for all of these projects over here, and I could ask you, what is the maximum NPV you could achieve with $100 million initial investment? And what you would do is take the NPVs of these, so let's say this is 17 million, and this is 12 million, this is 3 million, and this is, I'm screwing this up. Actually, I shouldn't even write that up there. What I would do though, is I would say, okay, I'm going to choose the NPVs of the projects I accepted. So I would take this NPV, I would take this NPV, I would not include that NPV, and then I would take these three NPVs and add them together. And that would be the maximum NPV I could achieve with 100 million to invest. Now, does it always work out that I get to invest every last single penny of my, no. It worked out because I made it work out, right? I could have had this one be 25 million, we would have had 5 million left over, and I could have put another project down here that was 10 million and we still couldn't have done it, right? Okay, so the idea is that we arrange these in descending order, meaning getting smaller, and we accept projects until we run out of money. And doing that gives us what we Americans call giving us the biggest bang for the buck. Now, I've given you the example of a company and where a company might use this. By the way, the capital would be scarce for, let's say, a startup firm. Do you think startup firms have access to endless capital? No. And so they might go through an operation like this to choose what should they invest in. The United States government also uses this. And the reason I know this is I was teaching a night class, teaching this topic, and there was a guy sitting right here, and he was an engineer, a civil engineer. And he said, actually, FEMA uses profitability index. I said, tell me about it. By the way, do you guys know who FEMA is?
Emergency response and
Yeah, so FEMA stands for Federal Emergency Management Agency or Administration. I never can remember. It was one or the other. Now, after they come in and they help people after a natural disaster. Hurricane comes in and blows your house away. FEMA comes in and will bring you a little trailer to live in while you are rebuilding your house. A tornado comes through and knocks out all the power in your area. FEMA will come through with trucks of ice. Why would it be important to bring trucks of ice through an area that had no electricity?
food, refrigerator.
Yeah, it's a whole lot better to bring in ice and help people keep their food cold than to try to feed a bunch of people. There are all sorts of things that FEMA does. Now, we would like to be able to prevent disasters. Can FEMA prevent a hurricane? No. Can they prevent a tornado? No. Can they prevent flooding? Short of building dams, no. But can they prevent flooding damage? And that's where this guy's example comes in. Every year, FEMA sets out a certain amount of money that's been allocated by Congress to go out and purchase properties in flood zone areas. Now, let's talk about how you would do an NPV on one of these projects. Is buying this house, by the way, we have to buy it and we have to tear it down. Why do we have to tear it down? We have to tear it down and we have to make the site where no one's going to ever, so we turn it into a public park or something. Why do we have to do that?
So flood zones, you don't want people living in the house.
Why don't, yeah, and what kinds of things happen in empty houses? Yeah, so you've got people creating drug labs. You've got people in there shooting heroin. You have lonely teenagers looking for love, or at least a place to, well, anyway. All sorts of bad things happen in abandoned structures, and they're typically not safe either, so we've got to tear them down. And so what we do is we say, okay, this is what it's going to cost to buy this property, and this is what's going to cost to tear it down and make it ready for whatever the new project is, which we'll call a little park down by the river. By the way, people love to go to parks by the river, go fishing, you know, the kids swim in the river, soak up toxic chemicals, it's all fun. Okay, now, how do I get a positive NPV knowing that I'm just going to spend this money to tear this down? Where does the positive future cash flow come from?
The money that they save from not having to do relief work when it does flood.
Oh, yeah. And here's what you need to know about our stupid government. So you build your house down by the river, and your house floods out. And they come by and they say, oh, poor baby, your house flooded out. Here's some money, rebuild. By the way, how are they doing that? There's a federally subsidized flood insurance program, right? So you've got this flood insurance, but you're not paying the full risk of that. So they're going to end up replacing your house. And so they give you the money to build a house. Where do you go to rebuild your house? Same spot. And 3 years later, what happens? Same thing. Government comes by and says, oh, poor baby, here's some more money. And what do? Rebuild the house. And then what happens again in 2 more years? It floods out. It's so funny. There's this one house in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and it's sitting in a field by itself. And it's a rent house. And every spring, it floods. Every spring. And they can't get locals to rent it. And so what happens is they get it cleaned up after the last flood, and then they rent it to people that are new to the area. And then when people say, hey, where do you live? And you say, well, I live in that little house in that field. And people say, phew, you're going to flood out. And sure enough, they do. Nobody stays there more than, say, 9 months. And then the government gives them money and they spruce it back up. It's a continuing drain on the treasury. And so that's where we get the positive cash flows, is not because we're actually getting money, we're avoiding spending money. And you could do the same thing at a company. In fact, most of the projects that I was involved in was positive NPV, not because we were opening new markets, but because we were saving money. We were reducing waste, and we were able to use those savings as our future cash flows to justify the project. Questions? Okay. Now, let's talk about profitability index and when it can go terribly wrong. And let's talk about mutually exclusive decisions. Remember that our NPV for Project A, I believe, was 24.34. No, wait a minute. Was that, yeah, 24.34, was that right? And the other one was like 116.09. Does that sound right?
1908.
What's that?
1908.
119.08, thank you. Okay, so that means the NPV on this first one is 24.34. I take 1 plus 24.34 divided by 100 gives me 1.2434. So go ahead and write that down as your profitability index for Project A. The NPV is 24.34. The PI is 1.2434. Now the NPV for B was 119.08. If I take 119.08 divided by 1,000, I get 0.11908. I add 1 and it gives me 1.19. What's greater, 1.2434 or 1.911? Sorry, 1.119.
1.24.
Yeah, if we just used just used PI to determine which one to accept, which one would we take? Yeah, we would take A. PI has the same problem with mutually exclusive projects that IRR does, and for the same reason. Neither one of them takes into account the scale of the project. You cannot tell by looking at IRR or PI what the scale of the project is. The reason with PI is because we're dividing NPV by that initial investment. And so we're actually scaling the NPV by the size of the project. And so it doesn't say anything about the scale of the project. We still will be better off to accept project B because, of course, it's got the higher NPV. And the goal of financial management is to
Increase shareholder.
maximize shareholder wealth. Either one of the projects would increase shareholder wealth. Only one of them will maximize shareholder wealth. So let's talk about what goes on in the real world. So a bunch of my finance professor colleagues did some research. They sent out surveys to companies, and these are all American companies. And they said, how often do you use each of these? On a scale from 0, where 0 is never, and 4, where 4 is always. They said, how often do you use these? And then they took their results and they divided them into large firms and small firms. Now, if you want to know the exact dividing line, you can go out to find Grant and Harvey 2001 and read the whole paper and you can figure it out. But we'll just take it generally as large and small here. Okay, now the first thing I want you to notice is that IRR and NPV are used almost identically the same amount of time at the large firm. And they are the most popular measures at large firms. But I want you to look over at small firms. Once again, IRR and NPV are used about the same amount of time, and we've already discussed why. If you've got enough material to do one, you can do the other one very easily. So those are both almost identical in both of those situations. But we see that small firms use NPV and IRR less than large firms. Any ideas why?
It takes more time and resources to get all the info they need.
It takes more time and resources to get all the info that you need. And that only makes sense when you've got a large project. What do you think the scale of the projects at small companies versus large companies look like?
A lot smaller.
Yeah, the small company, maybe we're looking at $20, $30, $50,000. Last Friday, I toured Paul Mueller, which is, they make stainless steel tanks for pharmaceuticals, dairies, and beer breweries. And they're building a $21 million expansion to their facility. Do you think that would be worth the time, money, and effort to do an NPV analysis? Absolutely. What if they were just, if it's a small company and they're trying to figure out a $10,000 investment in a new computer server? Would that be worth it? Probably not. Okay, so that's one reason. Another reason is that a larger firm is more likely to actually have dedicated finance people. Let's think this through. You get out of here and you start a business. Let's say you open a dog grooming shop. In the beginning, you probably don't have any financial people at all involved until it gets close to tax time. And then you decide to hire a financial thinker. What kind of financial thinker do you hire? Are you going to hire a finance person or are you going to hire an accountant? You're going to hire an accountant. So your very first hire from a financial thinking perspective is going to be an accountant. Only later on, when you are up to 17 branches with 300 groomers, are you going to start thinking about, whoa, maybe I need to have finance people. And so a larger company is more likely to have finance people who understand things like NPV and IRR. And so that's the second reason that we see NPV and IRR being used more frequently at large firms than small firms. Now we go down to the payback method. Now the payback method is still the third most popular at large firms, and it's the third most popular at small firms, but it's only slightly less popular than IRR and NPV. And for the same reasons. First of all, we know that the projects are likely to be smaller at small firms. And we said for payback was one of its strengths was for small projects, it's probably just as good or better because we're not having to pull together all that financial information. The second thing is small firms are less likely to have a financial thinker. And so payback, anyone can do that. I mean, my mom, she's 84, she could do that, right? This is not difficult. And so we see that at small firms, they're going to use payback more often than at large firms. Discounted payback, remember, it's a dog with fleas. I'm pleased to see it doing so poorly here. Then we have accounting rate of return. Once again, more popular at small firms than large firms, and once again, most likely because the top financial thinker at a small firm is more likely to be an accountant than it would be at a large firm. And then finally, we have the profitability index. And if you just looked at this, you might say, well, wait a minute, that profitability index measure must really suck because hardly anybody uses it. And I would tell you that's not the case. Actually, what this is a glowing recommendation for our system here in the United States. What it means is very few companies are subject to capital rationing. We said that's really the only time you want to trot profitability index out is when you're subject to capital rationing. And typically, if we've got a positive index, a positive NPV, we can get funding. Now, I was giving this talk to a group of MBA students, and there was a girl sitting right in front of me, and she was shaking her head vigorously, no. And I said, you disagree. Why are you disagreeing? She says, capital is hard to get. I said, where are you from? And she said, I'm from Vietnam. She's from your home country, Mr. Huang. She said, I'm from Vietnam. I said, okay, let's ask some questions here. Do you have well-developed capital markets in Vietnam? She said, no. I said, do you have banks? And she said, yes. I said, who owns the banks? Let's ask Mr. Huang. Who owns the banks in Vietnam?
Like all the banks?
Well, just in general, if you were to pick out a bank, the biggest banks are owned by the people. Oh, I love this. He's a good communist. Means the government, right? Have you been getting your dividend checks from the People's Bank? I didn't think so. Okay. So the government owns the banks. Now, what does that mean? It means the employees of the banks are actually government employees, right? Now, you are a lender at a government bank. I'm going to put Mr. Huang on the spot because he's going to be working at the People's Bank of Vietnam or whatever it's called. And two people are going to come in to see you. Mr. Roy and Captain Barentine are going to come in to see you for loans. Mr. Roy works for a state-owned enterprise. By the way, who owns his company? Same people that own your bank, right? The government. And Mr. Captain Barentine, he is private entrepreneur. They both want $100,000. They both can afford the same interest rate, but you only have $100,000 to lend. Who do you lend to? Government employee or private entrepreneur? Yeah, you know what side your bread is buttered on. That's an American expression. We know where our money comes from. If I work for the government, by the way, do you think the government's going to let his company fail? No. So I really don't have to worry that he's not going to pay me back. Does that make sense? Can we say that about Captain Barentine? No. Government doesn't care about him other than that he pays his taxes, right? And when they see he is successful, what do they do with his taxes? Right? So, do you see why in Vietnam she was saying, wait a minute, capital is scarce? Because she was looking at it from the perspective of a private entrepreneur in Vietnam. And she was absolutely right. And in her case, it would make all the sense in the world to use profitability index. But let's say instead of going back to Vietnam, she stays in the United States and opens up a business. Should she still be using profitability index? Not after she gets to the point where she has enough money to fund every project. Does that make sense? Okay, any questions? Next time, read Chapter 8 and be prepared to talk about Chapter 8. And we will also be diving into the Baldwin Company example from Chapter 8. The Baldwin Company example. I will be building the spreadsheet live in front of you without a net. Any questions? See you next time.